All right, guys, we're back here with Josh Collins, Coach Roel here. For part one and Josh's background, make sure you hop on over to Scott Meyer's website, YouTube channel, where we talk about all things self-storage investing. We're back here with Josh Collins for part two. And I wanted to just kind of jump right into it, if you don't mind, Josh. In terms of your investing, in your, I guess, your path, so to say, what would you say were two, maybe one or two of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome?
I'd say education. I think we bought our mini storage and then that initial warehouse, and we basically just said, we're going to put 50% down so we can't screw this up. And so, to get to a point where you're actually, I don't know, I think, doing a little bit better as far as returns on your money, I think you want to have a little more education. Second level of that, what we did is our sort of biggest issue then was figuring out the capital and figuring out how we're going to, put the money together to purchase the next facility. And so far, we've gotten pretty creative with that. We've refinanced a few properties. So the ones that we initially put 50% down on, we've refinanced those to take out, additional capital. Gosh, what are we now? I think we're leveraged up to like 75%. I want to say we ended up selling the mini storage that was effectively our first purchase to roll those into a new development. We just said, hey, we can make $1,000 a month with this mini storage, or we can sort of part ways with it, roll that money into something else that, I want to say that we're making $6,000 or $7,000 a month now. So, those are things that we thought we were going from like 1,000 to 3,500. So we didn't really expect it to go as well as it has, but at the same time, it was kind of like a multiple of that. So I'd say that was probably the most difficult thing, is just figuring out, okay, where are we going to come up with the money the next time? Now we just closed down a property 2 weeks ago now, I think it was, and that was our first property that we partnered on. And that's been an interesting experience. We ended up giving our partner a pretty nice cut of the profits, knowing that he's got to be able to go along with us and kind of cutting our teeth on figuring out this partnership thing. But it actually went super smoothly. It helped that we had the right partner, frankly. He was patient. He was kind of willing to sort of trip and stumble and fall a little bit with us, which I don't really, now going through everything, I don't really see that happening. But at the time, we're just like, hey, listen, you got to kind of be understanding that this probably isn't going to go perfect, every step of the way here. And he was totally on board, which is super helpful. So
that's really interesting, because I know a big stumbling block, or not a stumbling block, but a bit of an obstacle for myself personally, and for many people that I've talked to, is when you get to the point where you really need to involve other people. The catchphrase people say is use OPM. OPM is the best, and other people's money and all that. What sort of internal struggles did you have, if any, with reaching out and saying, you know what, we don't have all the money ourselves. We need to start opening up to other investors, other lenders, or even getting bigger loans? The idea of being accountable either to an institution that's going to lend you lots of money, or to an individual who's going to invest right along with you. Can you describe some of that process you went through?
Sure. I'd say a long time ago, my very first mentor had suggested a bank should always, basically you should use a bank as your partner as long as you possibly can, because that's going to be your cheapest form of money, frankly. And so I've taken that to heart, and that's well and good. But eventually anybody that's scaled up past a building or two is going to run out of money. I mean, it's inevitable. Even if you're super successful, you're still going to run out of money, because you're going to find enough deals that you just can't do it on your own. And so for me, I've been sort of planning this sort of crossroads for about 3 years now. I mean, so it's not like it just came upon me one day. It was, I got to figure out as much as I can prior to getting to that point where I'm going to effectively run out of my own money. And now I also know that the next phase of this scaling my business is going to be really almost getting rid of partners altogether. I'm probably going to go to the syndication model, mainly so I can get by with raising even less of my own capital, because I'm looking at it like, okay, when things are going well now, but I want to be able to spend some of my money that we've been making rather than investing it in. And my wife has kind of been the big push for this, is that, listen, when are we going to stop basically putting every last cent that we have into a savings account for the next deal and then the next deal? And because effectively what that's doing is, it's almost, yes, we're getting ahead as far as our net worth goes, and that's super wonderful, but it doesn't feel like our lifestyle is improving at all. And sometimes It actually feels like it's going backwards, because we're effectively just taking on more and more and more debt. without really seeing a payoff. Although we are, I mean, basically our savings account grows faster, but when that just keeps getting poured into the next property, it's been giving us this sort of weird feedback that we're not doing any better, even though, at least how I see it, is we're doing amazingly better. But it gives this weird feedback loop of we keep pouring money into new properties, but it's not really doing us any better. So,
right. Yeah, it's a weird conundrum, right? It's like you see your bank account and objectively it's like there's lots of money there. But then in your mind, which is a good thing, I guess, as a kind of an intermediary stage, is you've already separated that. That's not fun money, right? It's because when I used to advise people just as a traditional financial advisor, there's the concept of a rainy day fund, right? You set aside a couple $1,000, maybe there's some books that would say 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. You want to set that aside as your emergency fund or cash, and just getting people to look at that as that's not money that you go and spend. That's for emergency. It's hard for people to grasp that. But then on another level, as an investor, sure, you may have tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 plus or more sitting in cash, but in your mind, that's not for spending, right? That's for your next deal. What I'm hearing and seeing kind of a bit of a smirk on your face too, is it's, I think we're going along the same lines, is that when you start asking yourself, when am I going to start living the life I had set out to be? All this sacrifice and all this contrarian operations and doing something different than what you were taught to do in school, when is it going to start to pay off? So what clicked? What was the mind shift in your head that helped you to be like, you know what, maybe we should keep some of this money for ourselves or some of the cash flow to elevate our personal living lifestyle, but at the same time create opportunities for someone else, whether it's an investor or a bank or any other kind of private lender, even in the syndication model? Like, what can you pinpoint a time in your life, or was there an actual click in your mind that said, you know what, we got to start opening up to, instead of just using our own money, being able to scale up?
Yeah, it's a bit contradictory. So how I see it is that, so we build up like a really nice reserve account, and then we'd go up and over what I would feel like is a nice conservative reserve account. And then we take that money and invest it into another property. And so now all of a sudden your reserve account feels a little bit, a little low, a little too thin, but knowing that, hey, this has been backfilling, it's still kind of using it conservatively in that, listen, this has been backfilling itself normally or, monthly, like, it's something we can count on. But at the same time, to spend all that down and then put us in this sort of thinner, a little more risky, I guess you could call it, situation, that's not that we just sort of decided ourselves that that's not really how we want to sort of live our life. And so it really kind of comes back to, yes, we want to spend a little bit money on our lifestyle. I feel like our lifestyle is good. But how I see it is that it'd be really nice to save up a bunch of money to have the appropriate amount of reserves and then some, and then start to hammer on like our personal debt, like our house. We have a couple vehicles, but they're in the business's name. I mean, we could pay those off too, but it's sort of one of those, do we borrow money at 2.5% for a car, or do we pay it off in cash? We decided that we would borrow it. But as far as like our house and our personal debts, I guess our house is really our only personal debt, but still like those types of things to kind of make us feel a little more comfortable, a little more secure, I guess. I think that that's sort of the way that we're looking at this is, if we had this money, these profits to be able to put in our own account or kind of hold on to ourselves, we could kind of make ourselves feel a little more secure and stable in that regard. And it almost sounds like we're like taking these big risks, but really it's that they're all very calculated. However, I also realize that COVID makes you realize almost on a daily basis, like how uncertain the world and the markets and whatnot is. And that goes beyond just a rainy day fund, if you ask me. And so I think that's kind of that's sort of the approach, or that's sort of the thinking that's been going along here, is that, listen, we kind of keep spending our reserve accounts down so that we can invest again. But it's kind of leaving us in a bit of a precarious position where if things really went weird in the storage market for some odd reason, ready for that with a rainy day fund, I should say. Black swan fund, maybe I should call it. Yeah. Right.
It's interesting you mentioned the word risk, because it's funny when you talk to some investors that would put money in and borrow and syndicate or what have you. I don't think that subjectively, people are purposely putting themselves in a risky position, right? It's just a matter of like perspective. For example, the stereotypical employee type of mindset would say investing is risky. But then you ask an investor and they say, well, if I only had one job and one employer and one stream of income where I had to trade my time for someone else's money, that's risky. Do you believe that you're actually taking risk, or you believe for yourself and your family that you're actually taking a less risky route? What's your take on that?
Well, maybe I'll take this on a bit of a tangent here, Roel, in that.
Sure.
So a little while back, I read an article that our peak earning years are like 45 to 48. Something that it basically hit me that this is a ridiculously low young age for you to reach your peak earning years, and that really hit home in that I'm seeing my parents are still pretty young, but they're in their like early 60s, and I'm starting to see them and their friends losing jobs or going backwards in pay, even though they're professionals and they actually have like some legitimate skills. People, when you're the highest paid person in your company, you have to realize that you are almost always on the chopping block, right? I mean, they're always asking whether or not you're the next one to go, and that is just so out of your control that I just feel like you have to plan for an income stream other than just a W-2 income, right? Because what happens if you're doing well, you're 55, you're making $100,000 a year, and now all of a sudden there really isn't a job market for a 55-year-old making $100,000 a year, and they can hire somebody that'll do it for 50. You almost have to immediately take a pay cut of $50,000 to be competitive again. And boy, that's a tough time in life to be able to have to take that pay cut. And so I like the idea of, if you invest, yeah, it's a little risky, but you should never be risking something you can't lose, right? I mean, and with that, well, okay, so there's that. That's gambling. I'm sure to really go down that road. You would gamble it. You wouldn't gamble something that you can't afford to lose. However, investing is not gambling. Investing is low risk gambling. I mean, there's always an opportunity, but there's an opportunity to lose as an employee, right? So I see it as you're weighing all of the risks, all of the concerns, and you're making educated decisions with your money. But I personally like the real estate side of things, because I mean, let's say you go out and buy a house for $200,000. I mean, that house is not going to be worth zero ever. I mean, at least that's how I see it. I mean, I guess maybe there's like a rock crushing company moved in next door. Maybe you have an issue, but I mean, I just see it that is the downside is almost never going to be zero for something like that. Where stock market, there's a potential, I guess it could go to zero, but either way, I mean, I think investing is, it's making educated guess after educated guess, rather than just, you're not flipping a coin, which I think a lot of people, that's what you're doing.
I guess it's also a matter of control. So let me pose it to you this way. How do you mitigate? How do you minimize the risk when you're looking at a new investment? What's your philosophy, or what's your approach? How do you try to help me see a new investment opportunity through your eyes? What do you think?
Yeah, this is interesting. So, of course, I'm in the self-storage field. There seems to be a lot of opportunities right now to buy half-filled facilities. So basically, somebody went through the effort of building it, constructing it, getting it partially rented up, and now they want to exit. But it seems like their exit value is always 90% occupied rather than the 40 that they're selling it at. Those types of things bother me a lot. Like it's really hard to connect the dots between a 40% occupancy and 90% occupancy. Maybe it'll get there, maybe it won't. But I don't like the potential downside of you paying top dollar and it maybe doesn't ever get to the 90%. I'm seeing a lot of that sort of stuff, and it kind of just reminds me that what I've done pretty much all the way through here is that either you're buying an income stream, you're paying for that income stream. You'd really have to screw up to make that income stream go away. Like if you buy a self-storage facility and it's 75% full, I mean, you really have to screw it up to get it below 75%. But now there's some things that you can do to get it up and over that. And so if your baseline is 75% and all you can do is do better if you got it more occupied, well, that doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of risk there. Now, I've developed self-storage facility, and there is some risk there, but effectively what we've been doing is we knew that in the Twin Cities market, there was a need for a certain type of storage facility. So we built that. We didn't know whether or not this was going to take off or take at all, really. And so what we did is we did some grading. We put up one building as sort of our test case. Actually, we put up two buildings as our test case because we did an unheated and a heated building. Well, lo and behold, the first building rented before we even had it complete. The second build, and we got tons and tons of calls. The second building was heated. We finished that, I want to say like in March or April, something like that. Well, lo and behold, nobody wanted storage in April. They need heated storage in October or whatever it is. And so quickly made the decision then. The next building was supposed to be heated again. We quickly made the decision to make that unheated because it's a little cheaper product. We built that, filled that one before it was even complete, or pre-rented it, and that effectively covered our costs of everything. Well, then right around that time, it was September, I want to say, or late August, September. We rented that entire heated building in 2 weeks of September, whereas we hadn't rented a single unit all summer long. So these things, I sort of present themselves. I mean, if people keep calling you for something, you're probably onto something, right? And so effectively what happened is, so we made these larger units, so 25 by 50. The cheapest one is $585 a month. So, kind of your top dollar type of storage unit. And a lot of people kept calling us saying, hey, we just need to store a boat, $585. That's kind of a lot of money. And we got enough of those calls that we said, hey, why don't we try to find some property and build something that's slightly smaller, slightly cheaper. And so we did that. We built, instead of 25 by 50s, we built 18 by 40s at another location. And lo and behold, here we are full again. And we almost filled every building within 2 weeks of completing it. There was one building that we finished in, like, I want to say December 24th, like the day before Christmas, something like that, like whatever, the week of Christmas. Well, lo and behold, nobody rents anything around here in the middle of winter, which it was. And I don't think we rented a single unit in that building until March 1st. And then I want to say March hit and we rented that entire building up, which 11 units within 2 weeks. So it's just, the markets can kind of swing quickly, but you also kind of have to trust the process. If people are calling you all year long for a certain product or all summer long for a certain product, you get to the next summer, it's very unlikely that they're going to stop calling you again, right? So, I mean, there's some things that you can kind of push ahead with, knowing that eventually sort of the market's going to come around to you. But that we also had a neighbor who built 6 mini storage buildings all at once, and so now you effectively have 6 buildings almost competing against themselves for tenants. And I think that's sticking your neck out there a little bit. So I like to build mine in phases, fill them up. It takes a little longer, but we've also been able to pretty much cash flow from day one. That's been super, super helpful and successful. And it certainly takes a lot of the risk off your plate, or at least the sleepless nights.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is that when you first began, before you built your first one, you did some research to give yourself the confidence that this is going to be rented. And then when you did build and you started renting, you saw how fast they were filling up. You kind of kept your ear to the ground in the sense of just listening to what people were asking you for, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And the very first one we built that. Well, so we bought a mini storage and we bought a warehouse across the street from each other. Mini storage did just fine. The warehouse, it was 20,000 feet divided into about 3 or 4 units. And when those would come back up, they would rent out within like a couple of days. And we're like, man, we're onto something. But the reason why we even wanted to buy that in the first place was we had our own railroad construction company. And from the day that I started that to the day I quit working for the people we sold to, we were looking for more space to be able to put our equipment and materials in. And here in the Twin Cities, that was a really hard ask. It was really tough to find that type of product. And so buying that first warehouse and seeing how how many people were looking for that product. I mean, this is in Prescott, Wisconsin, which is, it's about the outer edge of the Twin Cities market as you can possibly get here. And yet we still had a lot of demand for that. And so with that, that's what kind of presented the opportunity to build our first facility, knowing from my experience in the construction industry, and then now having this building, which is kind of was our test case. We went into that first development, really with kind of a lot of knowledge and pretty good idea that this is something that people are looking for.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of overall, you mentioned a few keywords that I picked up on, is that lifestyle and risk and questioning risk. Have you formulated sort of like an investment philosophy or a couple of key points? I know we had talked about previously as well, that there are a couple of things that you kind of wish other people close to you could also come to realize, at the risk of you sounding preachy. But what are some of those concepts, or do you have like an organized philosophy where you're like, okay, this is how I approach my investments, or even if they're in smaller pieces, do you have something like that you can share?
I think there's a lot of different investment strategies or genres that work for a lot of different people. It's really tempting to get sort of sucked into something else because there's a lot of opportunities out there. I've kind of made the decision to just stick within self-storage and become as much of an expert on that as I possibly can. And then the interesting thing is, and then within self-storage, I've also kind of broke it down to this sort of maxi storage sort of niche even, and kind of become this sort of expert, whatever, quasi-expert, I should maybe say, in that sort of part of the self-storage sector. And so I guess I like the idea that I know this niche really, really well. I feel like if things turned, or if tons of this stuff was all of a sudden getting built next week, I would be completely fine doing a 180 and changing my investment philosophy. But I also kind of see this as I need to take this investment philosophy and see it as far down the road as I possibly can, rather than shifting into, say, residential real estate, which is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that, listen, I have a niche. I have a bit of a corner of the market. I really see it as I should keep exploiting that as long as I possibly can. And while also, dabbling on other things, or at least educating myself in other things so that I can make a pivot at some point. But I feel like that's actually my advantage here.
Mm-hmm. Now, two parts, kind of question to wrap this up. I didn't realize we've been going along so long. The conversation is so interesting. What would you say to yourself back then when you first started? Any advice that you would give to yourself? And then also, I kind of want to wrap up with what you see the next level for you would be. So you're talking to yourself back then when you had some uncertainty, knowing what you know now. What kind of advice would you give to yourself back when you first got started?
You got to trust your gut, for one. I think a lot of people say that, so I'll let them say it better than I could. The one thing that I really like is that success is not linear. And I want to say that, I don't know if we've talked about this or if I keep harping to my friends about it, but I think a lot of people get started and they make let's say they buy a house for their first property and they make $200 a month, and they think, I'm going to make $200 a month for the rest of eternity. And why am I doing this? I mean, it's a lot of work for $200 a month. What they don't realize is that their mortgage is getting paid down. It's allowing them to build up equity because the house is appreciating also. And what they don't realize is that 10 years from now, they're actually going to sell and they're going to make $75,000. They're not going to make their $2,400 a year for 10 years. They're going to see a big payday at the end of those 10 years, which I feel like a lot of people can't really see past that first initial $200 a month. And so then along with that too, that I like to explain to people is that, okay, so let's say you need $5,000 a month to cover your current expenses. Well, once you get to that $5,000 a month, like anything over and above that, I mean, if somebody gives you $500, and you get to do whatever you want with it, that $500 is actually a lot of money when you don't have any bills that you need to pay out of it, right? So I just keep thinking that if you can get to that point where, so for one, success is nonlinear, and the second one is if you can get to that covering your daily costs or monthly costs, I think anything over and above that is going to so rapidly improve your lifestyle that I don't think people can really grasp that. And I think it would have been nice for somebody to put their arm around me when I was getting started and say, listen, all of this BS and all this hard work is eventually going to get you to the point where, you know, things improve rapidly, you know, once you get to that break even point.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that a challenge these days? Especially everything is instant this and, you know, instant gratification with the Amazon model. Like in some places you can get stuff the same day or before the pandemic, there was like, I think they had a program called Prime Now, which is delivery within 2 hours. But
okay,
what I'm hearing from,
yeah.
from what I'm hearing from you is you're looking at a 10-year, you just mentioned a 10-year time frame buying as an example. But I agree with you. I think it's the reality is things, when you invest, you're not going to make the quick buck right away, especially if it's going to be sustainable. So in terms of you going forward, why do you do all this? It sounds like a lot. And I'm trying to remember from, you know, when I was just a simple financial advisor and in the traditional sense, what you're doing is like mind boggling to what probably most people are going to view this. Why would you bother doing this? What's your end goal? What's going to be your reward? Or what's your driving force here?
So I'd like to add one thing. The interesting part of this is I like to think that I've kind of reached this phase where I think I've been pretty successful with what we've done. And the odd thing is that I think everybody thinks that that's unattainable or that it's going to be super duper hard. And the funny thing is that these last 10 years have just gone by for me, and that's it. And the interesting thing is I actually just put together a graph last week on my net worth, because I was really curious at what we started with when we started our first business to where we are now. And what was that? We're basically at year like 11, I want to say it was. And I've 25x'd my net worth in those 12 years. And so, I mean, like, again, it didn't start off like that, but man, when it starts to ramp up, it starts to ramp up really, really quickly. So I guess my thought is maybe give people a little bit of hope that you don't need to jump from, you know, 10 grand in the bank to a millionaire in 2 years. Like, that's not how this works. It's gradual. But if you'll get to a certain point where you'll have $1 million worth of net worth, and then all of a sudden that becomes 2 the next year, and then the next year is 3 after that. I mean, you know, so it can go really, really rapidly if you kind of set yourself up for that. If you don't set yourself up for that, you're going to improve it by 10 grand a year for the rest of your life, because that's what you've been saving in your 401k or whatever it is. And it's going to be a lot harder to see those really big, drastic jumps. So anyways, so with that being said, my why is definitely my family. And I think I'm starting to see sort of this end game of, again, we covered our expenses. Now, when we see 1,000, like if we buy a property, we make an extra $1,000 a month. That's like that's a lifestyle jump. And the funny thing is, when you go from 0 to 1,000, that doesn't even register. But now, when you go from whatever it is, 6,000 to 7,000, like that's a lifestyle bump now. So it's really sort of showing itself that this whole plan all along has worked, and that's super helpful. Sort of to kind of. Well, for one, allow my family to sort of trust that I know what I'm doing, which is nice to finally be able to, you know, show them that.
Yeah.
But also I've kind of made these they're a little bit arbitrary goals, but they're not arbitrary in that. What I'd like to do is I'd really like to be able to donate $1 million, and that's the number is arbitrary. Other than, you know, we've donated a little bit here and there. We've done a few, you know, sort of good things. And let me tell you that I see that as the ultimate responsibility that the wealthy have, frankly. And I hope that someday that I can give away $1 million. And I don't, we have a couple charities and whatnot in mind, but I have a feeling that that's probably going to change along the way here as we kind of work up to that. But that's my ultimate goal. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So I think that's a great place to end off for here. I think it'd probably be a good idea to maybe in 6, 12 months, maybe circle back with you. But any parting thoughts for somebody who's just in the very beginning of, again, they're in their traditional sense, they're not struggling. Most of the readers of my book and my YouTube channel, not really the type that are struggling financially, but kind of in the position of having the golden handcuffs. They relate to me in that sense of, I'm doing well, I'm saving, I'm paying down debt, but I'm in a precarious position. because I have the one income and I am stuck with just saving. And if I can't work, the cash flow stops. So any kind of parting words or advice or inspiration or anything like that to that kind of an audience?
I would say that those folks probably have the most hope here, right? In that they make enough money that they can pay their living expenses, but they can also save on top of that. I guess I would sort of challenge everybody to have the mentality that they want to retire at the age 55 and figure out how they're going to do it. Because I think what that exercise does is it sort of challenges you to think, okay, so wait a minute. So my 401k won't be able to pay me between the age of 55 and 65. Boy, so that pretty much means that I would have to work until I'm 65 to even start to collect A, Social Security, B, out of my 401k. So, I mean, there's a 10-year gap there that you have to sort of plan for. And I think that starts to get the ball rolling for investing and figuring out some other sort of form of income. Because the other part of this is that you think your job is secure, but your job is not necessarily secure. And I think the sooner you start planning for that day that you might lose your job, I think the better off you are. I mean, worst case scenario, Roel, you buy a single family home, you rent it out, and you make your $200 a month. Well, at the end of that first year, you have $2,400 in the bank, and that following year, the motor goes out on your car, and you have a $5,000 car repair. Well, guess what? You already have $2,400 of that you wouldn't have had otherwise, that you can use out of this account that you're renting this house from. I mean, it's just small, weird little things like that where people don't realize that $2,400 is actually a big leg up when it comes to these sort of surprises that life likes to deliver us. Let's say you have that covered too. Well, then it's going to buy you an extra couple of months of retirement is effectively what it's going to do. And I think that the more times you do that, all of a sudden you get from that 65 retirement age all the way down to the 55 retirement age. And I think I think, like I said, I'd like to challenge maybe all your listeners to go through that exercise, because I think they'd be sort of surprised at what's reasonable, without completely cramping their current lifestyle. I think that it's pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it can be attained and reasonably well, or reasonably easy. So.
It's almost like, what if you had no choice, but by the age 55, that's a very interesting sort of a thought experiment. Even what if you had no choice, but at age 55, you had to stop working? How are you going to bridge that gap afterwards? And it is, you're saying in more of just like a like a hypothetical at first, to wrap their head around that. Yeah,
I think so. So I was in the construction world. My family's in the construction world, and I see it as a person is going to struggle in their 50s and 60s to have a construction job. I mean, yeah, maybe you're an equipment operator or something like that. Okay, sure. But if you're like a plumber, say, I mean, you're going to make really, really good money, but at some point your body isn't going to allow you to really be that normal you, I guess is kind of how I see it. And so just that itself, I mean, you're not gonna be able to work 60 hours a week anymore and make $250,000 a year. You're probably gonna have to dial it back. And now maybe you're only making $150,000 a year. Well, boy, that's a serious pay cut that not everybody's really prepared for. But now if you start thinking, geez, if I decided to open a little shop of my own and I could hire a couple of younger guys to give me a hand and we could kind of build this up. Now all of a sudden you get yourself out of the day-to-day, beating yourself up, and you're treating it a little bit more like a business. And now all of a sudden, instead of making $100 an hour, you're making $35 an hour on 3 guys' heads. And so you're right back to your $100 an hour, but yet you're treating it a little more as a business. I mean, it's those types of thoughts that not everybody, that I don't think enough people are sort of going through the exercise of, to figure out, okay, or if you're a plumber, let's say you hurt your knee. I mean, how are you going to make money for the next 6 months while you're rehabbing that or whatever? So again, it's thinking those things through. I feel like a lot of people don't really want to think of what the worst, what are the worst things that can happen? Because it's kind of a statistic, right? But at the same time, it could be you could be that statistic. So I think, I don't know, the sooner that you plan for something like that, I think the better off you are. And not to mention, I just think that you're going to likely turn it into something that you didn't even imagine it to be in the first place. Again, which is maybe a nice, successful business beyond what you could have dreamt about when you started it. Because I think that's how most businesses, started anyway, is they start out of their garage and all of a sudden they turn into 3M or whatever it is, something kind of crazy. So.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Very interesting perspective. So get started by just at least going through the thought process and then seeing, and then taking it seriously. What could I do? What would I do if the body starts breaking down? I couldn't work as hard, those sorts of things. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a really good way of looking at things. So,
so that statistic of, people's peak earning years are like 45 to 48. I have the sneaking suspicion that they're basically pointing at the construction industry, right? I mean, those are the guys that's where you make the most money. And then after that, now you and your body have become a bit of a liability. And so those are the folks that I think really need to start thinking about that sooner rather than later. And I also feel like those are maybe some of the best opportunities in all of business right now too, is the trades. So yeah, hopefully there's some guys that are in the trades that are listening to this.
Yeah, I hope there's a lot of wisdom there that people should, I hope will take to heart. So with that, thank you very much, Joshua Collins, for taking the time to share your philosophies, your background story here. And hopefully, again, at one point, we'll meet up in person one day.
That sounds great. Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, Josh. Thanks. Take care.
Yeah. Bye now.